Welcome to my YouTube channel, and today we are going to be looking at how we can retrieve data from an API using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what you have here is a HTML template. It's just a boiler template. So we're just going to clean it up a bit, and then we are going to be just sort of like creating a title header using an h1 tag, and we're just going to give it data. API data retriever for products. So using the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we wouldn't just only retrieve the data, but we would also be able to style the data in any given format. So that is the HTML file we've created. And the next thing we're going to move on is to the CSS file. So we want to create the stylings for things like the heading, things like the title, things like the cards, and the category as well. So we're just going to be creating a padding, and we'll just give that 10 for the padding. And then we create a margin. And then we also give that 10 as well. And we also want to have a box sizing. And then we can just set that to border box. And the next thing we want to look at is styling the heading. So how do we want the heading to look like? So we're just going to give that margin bottom. And we can set that to 1.5, I think. Yeah. And then we want to create a font family for the heading. And we will just set that to Korean New, Korean monospace as well. We also want to align the items. And then we're going to set that to, we want to align it to the center. We want the headings to be at the center. And then we're going to text align as well. We want that to be at the center. We want to add in some text decoration. So we want to make the text decoration and we want to put an order line to that. And we want the font weight to be bolder. And then the next thing we're going to be styling is the cards. So how do we want the cards to display? So we're going to set display to flex and justify content. We're going to just put that as space around, and the flex wrap, we would make that a wrap. And then we want to style the card itself. So we are going to be setting that to we want the weight to be set to something around probably 30%. And then we want to create a box shadow as well, just around the card of the data, because remember we are using we are actually fetching data from an API that contains images, so that's why we are styling the card. So we're going to set the box shadow to 0, 0, probably 4px, 3px as well, and then we're just going to give it some color. Probably pick something blue, or we can change that to make it maybe a bit lighter. Yeah, that's better. Something lighter. Yep. Okay, so then next, the text align. We want the text to be aligned to the center. And we want to set the padding to be 1.5. We also want to set the margin bottom as well. And then we'll set that to 2em, yeah. And then we want to set the border radius. Well, we can set that to something around 10%. So we're done with the card styling. We want to move on to the title styling. So we are going to set the font size to 1.3. And then we're going to set the font weight. We're just going to make that bolder. And then we want to give the color we want to give the color, set that to maybe something, let's make it a bit lighter, probably maybe purple or something bright. and then we want to set the category and price styling as well. Price. And then we want to have a font weight, and we just want to make the font weight bolder. And then we want to have text transform. We can just set the text transform to capitalize. And then we want to set the margin. Let's just set that to 1em. Yeah. And then the color as well. I'm just going to set that to purple. I think I like purple. Okay, so the next thing we are gonna style, next thing we want to style will be the image itself. So we just want to set just the width of the image, and we're going to set that to probably 80px. Yep. So we're going to go back to the API for the API HTML file and just include the class name. So basically the styling that we've given to the title header, and we're just going to include that styling in our HTML file. So we're going to include for category as well. We're just going to include the class name for category. And we're just going to give that category. And then we're going to include the class name as well for price. And then we're going to give that price. And what we want to also do is include. So basically we named our file api.css. So we want to include that in our href tag. So I'm just going to include api.css so we can call in that script in our HTML file. The next thing we want to move on to is our JavaScript file. So basically the JavaScript file is the file that fetches the data from the API. So we're just going to comment. So we're going to use this script or file to fetch data from an API. which would return, which will retrieve products from the data. And also, fetch data also returns a promise which can be either fulfilled or rejected. So we need to go copy the API that we want to retrieve data from. So we're just going to go to fakestoreapi.com, and that's fakestoreapi.com, and we're just going to go to the documents, and that's the API that we want to utilize for this tutorial. So we're just going to copy that line and paste it in our api.js file. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to use then and call in the data, and then use an arrow function to return the data. So we're going to have return data, return data.json. So I just want to make it clear that there are so many ways to actually fetch data or retrieve data from an API, but I chose to use this method. There are several methods you could use depending on your preference, but I just found this a little more straightforward and easy to fetch data for me. So it all depends on what you're comfortable with using. You have things like you have all the methods like the easiest method or the await and async function method. So whichever you're comfortable utilizing, they all will give you the same output. So it's just what you're really comfortable with using. So right here, I'm just gonna I'm actually gonna map the data using the map function, and so I'm just setting the data to an empty string, and then using product data and mapping the product data to the values. And then using an arrow function, of course. So we're going to have data, and then what we want to do next is to actually use the tags that we've created in the HTML file and use them in our JavaScript. So basically, also we want to also put in the script. So the api.js, we want to call in that script in our HTML file. So we'll set our div class, and also we are going to be utilizing the template literal to call in the objects, to actually use the objects in our HTML tags. So then we are going to have h3, and then we are going to have set that class to, using the h3 tag, we're going to set the class that we created in the api.css file. So we're just going to set that to title. So basically, we would need to retrieve the data based on the values that contains based on the values contained in the API. But we know that the data contains title, and it contains an image, and it contains a description, a category, and a price. So what we're just gonna do is we're just gonna go to we're creating the image tag as well, and we are also gonna set that image tag, and based on the styling that we had given it in the API.css, we are going to create give it that same class name that we had created previously for the image. And the next thing we are going to style as well, we're going to give it a paragraph, which is the description paragraph, just to have that as well. And we didn't set a class for styling for the description, so we're just going to leave that blank. And the next thing we are going to create is the class for. So we're going to set the class for price based on what we had created in the API CSS as well. And we can then close the div with a closing div tag. So what we've just done is just create the HTML tags that will be used in calling the values in the API. And now that we have all of our HTML tags, we would then want to create objects. But before we create the objects, we're just going to call in the JavaScript document.getElement by ID. And of course, we want to use cards. And then we just have the cards there. And we would give that dot. And we want to use the inner HTML. And we want that to be equal to our data. We are just going to also console log, and what we want to console log is the product data. Another good practice is to always use the catch error function as well. So we're going to have catch error, and then we are just going to console log the error. So basically what we are done is created a sort of like a template to actually retrieve our data from the Fake Store API. And there's some errors there, so we're just going to quickly correct some of those errors. Let's see. So and we want to double check what the data actually look like before we actually call in the objects in our HTML tags. So we're just going to go back into the API, and so this is how the API data looks like. And we're going to see that the values are images, price, and category. So we need to also add a category tag as well, and description. So we're going to go back to our JavaScript file, and we are going to add in the object, and that object is always represented by $. And since we had used values in to map the function, so basically the map function will map the data into our index file. So we are just going to have values.title, and we just, to save time, we'll just replicate the same thing for the image, the description, the category, and the price. So we can then go and check in. So we see now that we have the products mapped to our web page, and there are about 20 of those products. They've got the description, they've got the price. So we can check our console log, and we would see all of that data in our console log. And on our web page, on the other hand, we can also see the data mapped. So we can see the images, we can see the title, we can see the price, and so yeah, we have all of our data mapped. And like I mentioned earlier, there are several methods of actually fetching data from an API. This is just one method that I decided to use for this tutorial. So what we've done so far is retrieved data from an API, which we got from fakestoreapi.com. And we were able to achieve this using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.